So thank you very much for coming to our presentation this morning. I'm Robert Mays, and Suzanne and I are NDE researchers. You can read more about our research at our website, selfconsciousmind.com. More than 40 years ago, Suzanne and I read Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life. Somewhat later, we also read Return from Tomorrow by George Ritchie, the story of Ritchie's very deep, profound NDE. In this book, he detailed his encounter with the being of light, whom he took to be Christ, who took him on an extensive tour of the spiritual world. We felt that both books were very confirming of the spiritual nature of the human being and the existence of a transcendent spiritual reality. Many years later, in 2005, we began a serious study of NDEs phenomenologically. Neither of us has had an NDE. So today we bring a study of prophetic visions experienced by NDErs, predicated on the understanding that we have developed in our research. 2 points. First, there's strong evidence that the human being is a non-material spiritual entity. We do not die with the death of the physical body. And secondly, reality consists of the physical realm and a more fundamental, encompassing, transcendent or spiritual realm. Details of these two fundamental hypotheses of our work appear in prior presentations and academic papers on our website. Now we have 3 disclaimers. First, in this presentation we are presenting our views based on interpreting NDEr's testimony. Our views may or may not agree with the views of IANDS or the IANDS Board of Directors. And second, our findings are still preliminary and will be further refined as we continue our work. And third, the identity of subjects in our study is confidential, and we've assigned random initials. 15 of our subjects have also written books, so we feel free to quote passages from their books. We use the initials for information disclosed in the survey that we conducted, unless the subjects gave us permission to use their names. The motivation of our study came in March 2016, when NDEr Ken Lett related several prophetic visions during an interview on IANDS NDE radio. And his visions involve the current political environment, involving the 2016 presidential race and subsequent events. And later we also learned of the possibility of similar visions received by NDEr George Ritchie, and thus we started our study. Our intention in this presentation is to wake people up. Wake people up to the spiritual realities that are now playing out in the world, particularly as they are evident in NDEr's prophetic visions. We hope that people will hear the message from the NDEr's prophetic visions and not filter it out. It would be good to start with examples of archetypal prophetic visions. So George Ritchie's NDE happened in 1943, before the development of the atomic bomb and nuclear arms race. He had a vision at the end of his NDE of 2 corridors opened by the being of light. In the first corridor, as the being of light, whom he called Christ, showed him, he saw increasing natural disasters, earthquakes, volcanoes, people becoming more selfish, families splitting, governments breaking apart, culminating in explosions occurring all over the world. In the second prophetic vision that the Christ showed him, he saw instead the planet grew more peaceful, man not as destructive of nature, beginning to understand what love is, people becoming more like the beings he saw in the fourth and fifth heavenly realm. And the Christ said to him, "It is left to man which direction he shall choose." And another experiencer, Tom Sawyer, had a profound NDE in 1978. His pickup truck fell on him, crushing his chest, and he was dead for 15 minutes. He says, "I have memory of events that haven't happened yet from my NDE when I was part of universal knowledge." Two instructive examples of Tom Sawyer's prophetic visions that came to him after his NDE. First is the L-1011 TriStar plane crash. This is also documented in The Self Does Not Die. In October 1983, 5 years after his NDE, Tom had a vision of the crash of an L-1011 TriStar jet. At a gathering of NDErs, a statement was made, "There will never be another crash of an L-1011 plane." Because Tom could not let any untruth be uttered in his presence, he turned around and blurted out, "That's not true." But that meant that there would be another L-1011 crash, and Tom became very upset. He knew a lot of the details of the crash. He knew the first names of all the people in the plane, and that 90% of them would die. But he didn't know where it would crash. He also knew of all the details of the man who would be killed on the ground driving a car. 22 months later, on the morning of August 2nd, 1985, Tom had a vision that the crash would happen later that day. He called NDE researcher Bruce Grayson and told him, about 6 or 7 hours before it happened, that the plane would go down in a thunderstorm as it approached the airport. Delta Airlines Flight 191 crashed at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport on August 2nd, 1985 at 6:05 p.m. 136 of the 163 passengers and crew were killed. One man on the ground was killed when his car was crushed by the plane when it slid across a highway. There was nothing Tom Sawyer could do to prevent or mitigate the accident. And then there is another case where Tom was successful in intervening with prayer to avert a mid-air collision. Tom saw that two planes were going to collide head-on in mid-air. He says, "I became aware of this precognitively, even aware of the clock time. I worked with one of the pilots. As the event was taking place, there was extraordinary spiritual permission. Therefore, there was extraordinary effort put forth in loving the pilot of one of the planes. One only needed to be still and love the pilot of that plane. Just love the pilot and give him a prayer or a love gesture so that he will feel some degree of enhancement." A scenario like this took place. The pilot is really very bored. The plane is on autopilot. But he starts feeling really wonderful. He says to himself, "I am a really good pilot, and I'm proud of that. You know, I should sit up straight and in the proper position, even though the plane is on autopilot. Just sit up." When he did so, the pilot saw the other plane in exactly enough time to dive out of the way. Now, here are some details about our study. We did an extensive literature review of prior research, and we conducted a survey of NDErs who self-identify as having had prophetic visions of future world events. 11 of the surveys met our criteria for inclusion out of 32 that were returned. We also had access to the IANDS experience registry data. These are NDE reports that have been sent into IANDS, with 5 NDE submissions that indicated receiving visions of future world events. 15 NDErs also wrote books or articles describing their prophetic visions. So among these 3 sources of data, we had 22 total subjects, and many of the subjects fit in 2 or 3 of our data sources. And this is a list of the 15 published NDE authors. So what is the phenomenal experience of a prophetic vision? Precognitive experiences in an NDE occur during a life preview, which is usually part of a life review. From the IANDS experience registry data, we found that only about 4% of NDErs report seeing future world events. So that's a very small number of NDErs. The NDEr many times has a sense of having access to all knowledge in the NDE, covering all of the Earth's history and future. Specific visions may be revealed to the NDEr on a globe of the world, or as a quick glimpse of many future events, like riffling through the pages of a book. In general, most future visions in the NDE are suppressed after the NDE. The visions can come back in a dream or a waking vision. They can be triggered by the approach of the future event, sometimes years before, more commonly weeks or days or hours before the event, or when the NDEr hears about the event. Margot Gray, one of the researchers that we reviewed, says some NDErs claim that they were told at the time that they would not be able to recall everything, but would only have access to it when and if the need arose. And subjects in our study also said this. The event can be triggered also by being in a particular place. One NDEr in our study had several prophetic visions when visiting a specific location, such as the Murrah building in Oklahoma City, and having an intense sense of dread, or also having a vivid sensation of being transported into a future time at that same location. The prophetic visions are vivid and intense and have a compelling quality. And here are 3 examples. So Elizabeth Crone says, "There is the rush or power of the precognitive nightmares. These truly spirit me away as if I were on a runaway horse. There is an energy force that will not allow me to awaken. Even as I am struggling with a vision of some horrific scene, I am simultaneously receiving information. Once I receive whatever information I'm supposed to be given, I will be able to open my eyes and make it stop. Whatever I saw is seared into my memory." And NDEr Tom Beck says, "Seeing all these visions of disasters and terrorism started to affect me physically. The more intense visions would cause me to be physically weak and sometimes disoriented and dizzy. The deeper and darker the vision, the worse these effects are. Sometimes after a particularly bad vision of terrible evil acts and many deaths, I'm unable to walk for short periods of time." And Professor Abednego, which is a pseudonym, says, "The premonitions are sometimes preceded by what I would call a cold spiritual wind. These premonitions lack affect, that is, there is no fear, no agitation, no emotion attached to the visions. They are kind of factual, like reading a word's definition in a dictionary. The prophetic visions can vary from a general description or image to extremely detailed specific facts about the future event. Professor Abednego believes that the more specific a prophetic vision is, the more likely it has already been set in motion on a spiritual level. The visions are usually completely accurate, or nearly so, when the event finally occurs. For example, Tom Sawyer had numerous veridical aspects of his vision of the L-1011 crash. And here's an example of Elizabeth Crone. The first plane crash nightmare I had was on July 16, 1996, about 8 years after my NDE. It really rocked me badly. In the nightmare, I knew there were 230 people on board, and that none of them had survived. I knew that the plane crashed in water, and I knew that it was Flight 800. I called my mom and told her about the nightmare on the morning of July 17, 1996. The next morning, July 18th, Mom called me to turn on the news quickly. And there it was, TWA Flight 800 had crashed in the Atlantic Ocean that prior evening with 230 on board, no survivors. This particular nightmare really upset me because of its accuracy. So, in some cases, the NDEr can do nothing about the situation. As with Tom Sawyer and Elizabeth Crone also seeing earthquakes and a tsunami, and Tom Beck seeing terrorist attacks. But the NDEr comes to realize that the visions of this sort are real and are likely to be accurate. In other cases, there can be successful intervention, for example, through prayer, for example, with Tom Sawyer preventing the mid-air collision. And Tom Beck says this: after 9/11, people came together and we prayed together by the thousands, hundreds of thousands. I know there were planned attacks that did not take place because of our praying. I know because I saw the attacks that were to take place and had such hope that other attacks I saw were not going to happen, but they did. We grew weary of the war and we quit praying. Margot Gray says, in fact, many NDErs stress that events can always be affected by right human action and prayers to God for His intervention. So, we can conclude, I think reasonably, that predictions that fail to materialize can be due to the free will choices of individuals. An NDEr told Gray, I was also shown events that are likely to happen in the near future, but was made to understand that nothing is absolutely fixed, that everything depends on how we choose to use our own free will, that even those events that are already predestined can be changed or modified by a change of our own way of relating to them. And several NDErs say the best prophetic visions are the ones that do not happen. Now, we're going to go through the significant prophetic visions that we received, the most specific ones. And there are 5 common categories of prophetic visions found in our study, and you can see from the slide that there are a number of NDErs who have seen these visions. And we've selected the visions with the most specific details to illustrate the variations among the different visions. So the first category is current political conflict and civil strife in the U.S. Second is economic and social chaos caused by widespread power failures. The third is severe tsunamis, earthquakes, and natural disasters. The fourth is what we call the reset of the earth, where many, many people die, caused by probably a supervolcano or an asteroid strike or a nuclear war. And we note that there's some disagreement among NDErs because the angel said to Howard Storm about the possibility of nuclear war, no, that is not going to happen. God will not allow a nuclear war. And then there are visions of the post-reset world, which are, from the NDErs' accounts, are anywhere from 150 to 300 years hence. And we have a caveat here. None of these prophetic visions is completely certain to happen, from what we've already said. There is a certain probability that they will happen, given the pattern of actions or inactions already set in motion. But human beings can change and choose to act differently, which will alter the outcome. Other human beings can intervene through their own actions, for example, with prayer and compassion towards others. So, when we go through these visions, please listen with an objective mind to all of the prophetic visions, regardless of your own political or religious persuasion, please. This first category is political conflict and civil strife, and the first vision comes from Ken Lett. Ken's visions occurred during his September 1963 NDE at age 8. They were pointed out to Ken on a globe of the world in the region of the United States. Most of his visions were deliberately suppressed after the NDE and then returned as visions starting in his early 20s. His first visions of the vile, disruptive president came back in early 2016, prior to his March 2016 interview on NDE radio. Here are the major parts of his vision. I saw the assassination of JFK and was told it would trigger a period of turmoil and that it would be the beginning of some bad events in the US, and those events would eventually make our nation bitter. Then the vision jumped to a point in the future, much later in my life. I saw what looked like a large government building with multiple tall pillars in front. I think it was the Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C., and was told that an important ruling would take place there. This caused a kind of mass rebellion centered in the hearts of people, mostly men. Many of them were of the evangelical religion. And this is possibly the 2015 ruling on same-sex marriage. Then the vision changed, where I observed a woman speaking during her presidential campaign. She was running for office during a period of much turmoil. I later heard Hillary Clinton speak during her campaign, and it was the same voice I heard in the vision. Also, I did not see her as a bad person. She was one of the last good chances to turn our country around. Next, I saw a man leading our country, and he is president. He is a vile, disruptive man who causes people to lose faith in our government. The man is arguing with everybody, causing unhappiness and disruption. I remember the man being blonde. Now, comment here. The factual events in Ken's vision from 1963, most people would agree, have so far been accurate. The rest of Ken's vision has yet to happen. Then a group of men confront this president in his office. He was pushed out of his position in government. Next, he was removed from the government buildings as he stood outside shouting to crowds, shaking his fist. He is extremely angry, inciting violence, rioting, and destruction. People are fighting and injuring each other. There were men in the crowd that appeared as dark shadows with evil intent, and I got the impression they were not Americans. They were working purposely to cause more violence, pushing people to fight in the streets, using misinformation. Now, again, a comment. Please note that the vision does not say when exactly or how the president comes to be removed. And again, remember that this vision was given to Ken in 1963. At this point, I asked the teacher entity how it was that this terrible man came to be our president. I was shown a vision of the Bible and something like a line of progression, which, after a point, highlighted Southern evangelist religions. These churches only worship money and political involvement, and they guide people to vote for the angry president. They are doing this in the name of God, which is a horrible sin. The evangelical movement was a main influence in getting the terrible man elected. They promote him as someone God supports. The next part, the fighting in the streets after he is removed from office has the nation shaken and appalled, but after a while the fighting settles down. Then I saw the evil president inside a disruption, like a spinning spiral wheel. I understood this image to mean that he would pass away, thus ending his influence. I saw him in a hospital bed with people standing around him before the spinning disruption indicated his passing. The president will not live very long after leaving office. I don't know what caused the evil president to die. After he is gone, next point, there appeared to be a sense of hope returning to the country among those who did not like the disrupted president. But it's too late, and the seeds of evil that he planted continue to grow until more disruption returns and the ultimate battles begin. At this point, America is divided in a similar fashion as the previous Civil War in the 1860s, and most of the fighting takes place in cities in the South and eastern states. This Civil War is much worse than the first. And now we will skip the subsequent events during the Civil War in his vision until we reach the point where the vision showed that the Civil War ends and there is remorse and sorrow. And the last two parts of his vision will be covered in other categories. So Professor Abednego, again, that's a pseudonym. His first visions of Trump, so this is, again, still in this category, political conflict and civil strife. His first visions of Trump as president occurred in July 2016. He said, I wanted to deny the visions big time, but my spirit knew they were true. As with Ken Lett's visions, many people would agree that some of Abednego's visions have already occurred, but others remain possible future events. I saw Donald Trump become an American Führer. I saw Trump increase terrorism by his actions, thereby able to establish martial law. I saw Trump imprison oppositional news, eliminate political enemies, fill the courts with judges who worshipped him. I saw news media unwittingly help Trump to become a dictator. Trump's ultimate goal is to eliminate the other two branches of government so he can rule as a permanent dictator. So the second category is economic and social chaos, due primarily to widespread power failures. Howard Storm, during his NDE, had a conversation with Jesus and the angels. They said, your country will collapse economically, which will result in civil chaos. Because of the greedy nature of the people, you will have people killing people for a cup of gasoline. The world will watch in horror as your country is obliterated by strife. And then another part, there will be an electronic failure worldwide, leading to societal chaos and the destruction of most of the world as we know it. The catastrophe will wipe out all electronics and our power grid, and we will quickly be without water, food, transportation. Economic chaos will lead to people stealing, killing, hoarding. And again, in the same vein, Tom Beck says there will be attacks on our banking systems and utility infrastructure. Food and water will become scarce commodities as our transportation systems fall apart. We will be without utilities, no electricity, no water, no sewage system, no internet, no phone. We will be in the dark. There will be food riots and anarchy in the streets. The country will disintegrate into small local territories. Now, there are two plausible scenarios that could happen which would bring this about, and the more plausible of them is that due to the weakening of Earth's magnetic field, solar flares can begin to cause catastrophic failure of electrical power grids, satellites, internet connections, and electronics. Even small solar flares can now cause serious disruption because of the weakened magnetic field. And another plausible scenario is that terrorists or foreign governments attack the U.S. power grid, electronics, transportation infrastructure. The next category is U.S. earthquakes, tsunamis. And this is subject RR, or the initials. It is highly probable that an 8 or 9 magnitude earthquake will occur in Southern California before the end of December 2020. There will be a wall formed by shattered glass from the skyscrapers in downtown LA with fires, flooding. There will be thousands of corpses decaying in streets, unable to be hauled out of the wreckage. And also from RR we have a tsunami on the West Coast occurs after an unexpected earthquake in Oregon. Due to that quake, there will be massive loss of life along the coastal cities. Sacramento, California will flood. There will not be enough time for residents to escape to higher ground. They will drown in Sacramento Lake. And I want to point out, if you don't know the geography of California, Sacramento is only at 30 feet elevation above sea level. And another subcategory of this is that the U.S. will be split in two. And Sarah Minette says, a huge earthquake occurred in the middle of the United States. It seemed to split the U.S. in half about where the Mississippi River is. The crack in the earth that resulted was huge, miles wide. And as it opened, the earth seemed to swallow everything. Water flowed in from the Gulf of Mexico all the way up to the Great Lakes. And Sharon Milliman says, I was shown a silver ribbon splitting the United States apart. I was told that this ribbon was a river. I felt it was the Mississippi River. The ribbon becomes larger over time. And now we get to the reset of the earth. Because a number of NDErs have had the vision that a major portion of the earth will be destroyed. So Ken Lett's vision, the next thing I was shown involved a huge explosion coming from the area of Wyoming or Montana, which could be the supervolcano in Yellowstone exploding. A giant mushroom cloud forms above the explosion, and a ring of white clouds that stays close to the ground expands across the continent all the way to the east coast as all life is extinguished. And Tom Beck has a similar vision, but in a different part of the earth and a different mechanism. A comet will strike the earth. I think it will hit in China, because I see what appears to be Chinese writing on signs and vehicles where it strikes. The largest pieces of the comet strike the ground with enough force that they throw up mountains of dirt, dust, debris, and smoke that blocks out the sun. Sometime later, there will be worldwide earthquakes and eruptions of volcanoes. I also see a period of winter that will be brought on by all the dust in the air. This winter will last for a couple of years, causing worldwide starvation. And the plausible scenarios are, again, the supervolcano, something on the order of Lake Toba explosion that happened 75,000 years ago, can destroy a wide area of land from massive ejecta, and they can also cause a global winter lasting 5 to 10 years, and in the past have caused mass extinctions. An asteroid or comet can also cause similar effects. And the last category is a bit of a relief. After the reset, and Ken Lett's vision. After the explosion, I saw that North America remains uninhabited for a long time as it becomes overgrown with many trees again. Eventually there will be human activity. I was shown a small group of people living in a hut-type structure in the southeast. They were living simple lives, much like tribes of natives, before the U.S. was established. And Howard Storm, in his NDE, was shown this vision, which would be towards the end of 2100s. We were in a beautiful natural wooded setting. The angels told me that this was the future, a garden that people tended. People were dressed simply and had exotic ornaments of a kind of, and he believes that they are a kind of spiritual technology. They are all participated in child rearing and teaching as the most important activities of their lives. The people will grow only enough food for their needs. With prayer, the plants will produce huge fruits and vegetables. Collectively, all the people of the world will control the weather. There will be countless small communities of people, each with its own identity and culture. All people will be able to communicate telepathically. There will be no need for technological devices, since humans have the power to control matter and energy. This will come about in 200 years. Now, I want to give you a context, spiritual context, of the prophetic visions. And we gleaned from NDErs, particularly NDErs that have had these prophetic visions, 7 basic principles, spiritual principles, that are revealed by NDEs. The first is, and the most important, we are all eternal spiritual beings. We do not die with the death of the physical body. Second, there is an overarching spiritual aspect of reality that encompasses all of physical reality. And you can refer to our previous research presentations on both 1 and 2. There is a plan and purpose for life on earth. Things specifically to be learned, experienced, and done. Now, about 60% of NDErs were told during their NDE, it's not your time. You must go back. You have more to do on earth. So the implication is that we have chosen our life's difficulties and challenges for spiritual growth and maturity, to be enriched by life experiences and to grow in universal compassion and love towards all. Moving on, Betty Eady says, evil exists for a divine purpose. Because of it, we become aware of our weaknesses. As we gain control over our appetites and desires, we begin to see how the influence of evil has strengthened us. When we see evil for what it is, we become less susceptible to its negative influences. We become free from ignorance and fear, and therefore we are more wise in choosing our course in life. And the malevolent, retarding beings incite in us fear, anger and hate, lies and doubt, and greed and selfishness. But they are all working ultimately for our benefit, to strengthen us. The fifth point is that suffering also exists for a divine purpose. Nancy Van Alphen says, suffering has come about by the separation of man from God and has become a learning tool to help us make our way back. George Ritchie says, suffering arises as the consequences of our actions. When God gave us free will, He also gave us the responsibility of suffering the consequences of using that free will, if we do not use it under His guidance. Rene Passereau, by the way, these are all NDErs who have had these prophetic visions, most of them, Suffering in this life can actually be a gift. Suffering is a catalyst which creates for us opportunities to grow spiritually. Without suffering, how could we develop compassion? Without danger, how could we develop courage? Betty Eady says, suffering can teach us. In my life review, I understood my own ignorance in life, and now I understood why others had done negative things to me. Seeing events from their perspectives, I could forgive them freely, because I perceived their ignorance too. And number 6, we have free will. We have the choice how to act and respond. God will not interfere with our free will choices. And the 7th principle of the 7, and this is important for understanding the prophetic visions. The collective environment of all human thoughts, feelings, words, and actions works on the spiritual level, forming a kind of spiritual atmosphere around the earth. This spiritual atmosphere has an influence on everyone for good or ill. An NDEr told Margot Gray, I saw a gray miasma, or noxious atmosphere, spread all over the earth. It was the vibration of fear that was causing it. This fear was causing violence and social unrest. It would only get worse until people learned to overcome fear with love and goodwill toward all men. And this spiritual reality can be seen at work in the world as the ripple effect, spreading out as more and more people are influenced. Some positive examples are the positive responses in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks, and the worldwide response to the election of Barack Obama. And some negative examples are the source of the mass shootings that were motivated by racism, anti-Semitism, and white supremacy in Charleston, Pittsburgh, and El Paso. And another part of this aspect of this atmosphere is that spiritual beings and forces of nature are also at play in the spiritual atmosphere. So we have positive, benevolent, progressive spiritual beings who give us guidance, assistance, and protection in our lives. And most NDErs know that. But there are also these negative, retarding, evil spiritual beings that are tempters and tricksters, working to challenge, block, and disrupt our lives. And how do we respond? That's the question. And the forces of nature are also affected positively and negatively as a consequence of human thoughts, feelings, and deeds. Betty Eady said, planet Earth possesses a spirit, a life force of its own. In a very real way, it is a living entity. Currently, the Earth suffers from evil and abuse heaped upon it, which pull and distort the Earth's harmony, throwing natural forces off balance. Seasons will continue to be altered. Earthquakes will split the Earth. Floods will rage. Disaster will follow disaster as a direct result of our collective disregard for universal laws. And Rabbi Robbins, Stephen Robbins, is NDEr, many negative effects of human destruction, pollution, and contamination can be reversed only by human actions or by centuries of gradual healing of the earth. God cannot do it. God cannot intervene and clean up the earth for us. So now, finally, what do prophetic visions mean, given these spiritual principles? 4 things. First, the prophetic visions are warnings of likely future human deeds, future accidents, and future natural disasters. An NDEr told Gray, "I saw that the last time the world faced a similar situation was just before the destruction of Atlantis, which is the flood. Then, as now, people were given plenty of warning that they were disregarding natural and spiritual laws, and if they continued to carry on as they were going, they would eventually have to face the results of their folly. But they chose to disregard the signs. In the end, all but a few who had heeded the warnings perished. It will be the same this time." And remember, point number 2, nothing is completely predestined. These events can be averted or mitigated, even massive natural disasters. Tom Beck says, "Occasionally I have visions of disasters that do not take place. I have been told that this is because the people have free will and sometimes change their minds. I take assurance knowing that the vision can be changed, and the outcome does not have to be as I first saw. It can be modified by the choices we make. Maybe that is the lesson to be learned, that the visions are real, but the outcome does not have to be." And the third point, the prophetic visions convey the urgency of what we need to do to avert or mitigate them. Renee Passereau, in her 2018 book, says, "We are on a path of self-destruction. There is no more time to waste." And the fourth point is, so if a change is going to happen, it begins with each of us. The being of light made it very clear to Daniel Brinkley that we are all mighty spiritual beings and that our destiny is in our hands. So how should we respond to adversities before they actually come? There are 4 things that we can do. The first is to develop absolute equanimity toward everything that may come. Remember that we do not die with the death of the physical body. And so our death is not our end. Remember that suffering isn't going to last forever. Margot Gray says, "Those NDErs who felt that the events foreseen are now inevitable, nevertheless," and this is an important, subtle point, "even though they are inevitable, nevertheless," these NDErs stress that rightly understood, the outcome is both necessary and desirable. So even the destruction of the earth is necessary and ultimately desirable. That is to say, the reset of the earth. And they all ultimately work for the good. And the second thing is to work in service to others out of love. And Daniel Brinkley, who is the premier NDEr who volunteers to serve others in hospice, says, "What matters to Spirit in the life review is how often you were willing to help others through your love, kindness, and compassion." And NDE Lance Richardson says, "Service is the answer to reclaiming our society and changing our hearts as a people. With service, unity replaces selfishness as each person becomes deeply committed to the good of the whole rather than one's own self-interest." And what can NDErs especially do? We should all do these things, but NDErs are especially capable to help avert the prophetic visions. NDErs have experienced the spiritual world and know that we do not die. So the third thing is prayer. NDErs have special abilities to pray, visualize, send healing and compassion to others. Prayer is the greatest act of free will, prayer especially together in groups. Ned Doherty said, I was told, and he has had prophetic visions, I was told that the world could be saved, not by its leaders, but by the prayer groups throughout the world. I was told that the prayers of a group of 20 could save a nation from war.
Amen. Right on.
Practice prayer and compassion towards all people, even one, or I should say especially, one's adversaries and enemies. Professor Abednego, you know how he feels about certain things. Nothing good can come of Trump's narcissism. Still, I pray for him. That foolish man. And fourth, a great awakening is happening. Spread the word that we all need to change. Betty Eadie said, our world stands on the brink of a spiritual renaissance, a revival of spirituality that will sweep the earth and change it in significant ways. The Great Awakening has already begun. Light and knowledge have begun to flow from heaven in greater intensity. Evil, by its opposing nature, is rising up to challenge this awakening. But the harder the opposition, the harder the angels and good people will work to create it. And Rabbi Robbins says, if we rise to our ultimate challenge and make a holy response, a miracle is possible that shifts the heart of humanity. So, thank you very much.